Hey guys, thanks for coming back and joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Great to see you again. So, for today's episode, we are going to talk through some tips and recommendations on how you can persuade other people to accept your arguments, your ideas, to sell your products, sell yourself, etc., etc. I've been in the business world for decades, long time. Hate to admit how long because it reminds me how old I actually am. But your ability to influence and persuade other people has a huge impact on your career trajectory. And so it's not necessarily sales. I call it persuading because you're not necessarily trying to sell them something. You may want to get them to think the way you think and support your idea internally. You may be trying to persuade your boss to take your project on or push your agenda for the company because you think it's the right thing to do. So I wouldn't think of it as selling. I think persuading is the right way to think about it. That's just my own personal opinion. You can call it what you want. But for the purposes of today's episode, we're going to talk about tips on how you can persuade other people. And I think the first thing you want to do in these situations is really identify what's your intentions? Why do you want to persuade other people? So from a political aspect, I'm very, very libertarian. And I would argue that most people are at their core very libertarian. The challenge becomes when it's hard for other people to allow other people to do what they want without judging them, without commenting on them, et cetera, et cetera. So I absolutely think you should keep as much of your money as possible. I'm not a big fan of taxes. I don't think the government is an effective or efficient method for allocating resources in the market. I think there's tons and tons and tons of examples throughout history that show any central decisions generally wind up worse than a market decision. Um, and so when you think about it from that perspective, why do you want do you want to persuade people so you can control them? Do you want to persuade people so that you have a lot of power? I don't know that that's the greatest motivation in the world, and maybe that is your motivation. I don't know. It's not mine. I genuinely think that people would be better off if they had more freedom and took more ownership of their lives. I've seen person after person after person who stops acting like a victim, stops blaming others or making excuses, takes control of their situation as much as possible, and their lives almost always take off. It's the same reason I've never done an illegal drug in my life. I got nothing against it, really. It's just not my thing. I've never looked at someone outside of creative folks. So, like, if you're a musician, if you're an actor, if you're in one of those creative fields, uh, look, maybe smoking some marijuana is good for you. Maybe it makes your mind work different. I don't know. I've never done it. But I don't know a lot of accountants that work better when they're high. I don't know a lot of airline pilots that work better when they're high. I don't know a lot of heart surgeons that work better and make good decisions when they're high. So it's never been my thing. But you got to ask, what were your intentions? Are you trying to persuade people for good, or are you not being so above board with what you're trying to persuade them for? And you got to be honest with yourself. Sometimes you got to look and say, hey, maybe this isn't the hill I die on. Maybe this isn't the battle I pick. Maybe I'm better off just letting this one go. But let's assume for a second that you've got good intentions, you've got a good idea, you got something that's helpful for people, and you want to persuade them. So how do you do that? What are some tips you can use? What are some things you can focus on to really be persuasive when you're dealing with people? And look, so I'm talking about this in a kind of a speaking method, but the same holds true for writing. So, tip one is to speak clearly and directly. Use clear language. Don't use flowery words. Don't use words that don't come up very often in vocabulary. There's a time and a place to show off your awesome vocabulary and your word of the day or whatever it is that you've got going, but typically people don't want that when they're listening to a sales pitch or when they're considering a new idea. They want you to get to the point. They want to clearly understand what it is you're trying to articulate. They want to clearly understand what the benefits are for them. They want to clearly understand what some potential drawbacks are and what some solutions are for those drawbacks. and they want to know, why should they consider this? Why is it worth spending time and effort considering this particular proposition? So speaking clearly with basic direct language is a good way to go. And so the rule of thumb that I give people is if you can't explain your proposition to a 5-year-old and make them understand it in 30 seconds, you're not done. You got to go back to the drawing board and think of a different way to do it. Now, if you're in physics and you've got some differential equation that really kind of explains exactly how the load disbursement on a bridge works, got it. That's a little different story. But for most of us that aren't rocket scientists or aren't engineers or aren't mathematicians or scientists that are working on crazy esoteric stuff, you should be able to explain almost anything in a basic way that makes people understand it. That, like, again, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old and have it make sense to them, gotta go back. Gotta go back and do it again because you're not ready yet. The more you have to talk and the more you talk uninterrupted, the worse it is. Take a lot of pauses when you're making a pitch. President Obama was a master at this. He was so good in the approach that he took when he was speaking, and he took long pauses. He used them for dramatic effect. He slowed the cadence down. He made people feel like they were a part of something. He was a master at it, did a great job. So it's very important when you're speaking not to rapidly attack people with your words. Slow down, pause every once in a while, let them absorb what you said, and they're going to see that you're for real. So it works. See what I just did? See how I paused there? Kept waiting for me to say the next thing? That's how it works. It's not rocket science. But it's very hard to do, and you have to kind of coach yourself. It's a learned behavior, but it's a very important learned behavior if you're going to be persuasive and get your ideas taken care of. Number 2, use facts and experience to prove your point. It's by far the best way to manage a debate, an argument, to sell, et cetera, et cetera. So using real data is impactful. Let's say you work at a food service wholesaler and you're trying to sell more lettuce to your customers. If you can show that when customer X switched from their current provider to your produce and your lettuce, they saw a 20% increase in their salad sales, that's very impactful data that you can use to persuade other customers to give it a try. Look, Steve or Betty tried this and they saw a 20% increase in their salad sales. That's how good our lettuce is. People will notice it and you'll sell more salad. And that's good. That's the old what's in it for me, like we've talked about in previous videos. What's in it for me? I don't care that you want to sell me more lettuce. I want to sell more salads. Help me sell more salads. And that's a good way to go. Providing real case studies, like we just talked about. Restaurant X used this and saw their salad sales increase. And keep in mind, nobody wants to be a sucker. Like, it's hard to get the first person to say yes. And from a negotiation perspective, we'll talk a little bit about negotiations. We'll do a separate deal on just negotiations. But you actually want them to say no first. So you want to ask them a question they're going to say no to, because it gets them to lower their guard. They say no, you're still there talking to them. And when you hear no, that's a good sign. No is no is actually what you want to hear first, because you got to go through no to get to yes in most instances. So, number 3, match your audience's cadence and body language. So, if you're pitching to a room full of subdued people that are not real excitable, that are pretty kind of calm and kind of even keeled, you want to be that way as well, because nobody wants to be the window. Nobody wants to be accosted by like the window salesman who makes the appointment and spends 2 hours in your house measuring your windows and explaining the R value of your windows and how much you'll save on your heating bills, and they refuse to leave until they sell you a couple of windows. Nobody wants that. Now, with that said, if you've got an audience that's lively and you've got an audience that's really into what you're doing and you feel like you're in the middle of an infomercial, then go with that. You can be a little more animated. You can be a little more peppy. You can be a little more excited in those instances. But I think you got to read your audience and really kind of understand what you're seeing and mirror that behavior back to them. If they're calm and subdued, you want to be calm and subdued. If they're more excited and happy, then you can be more excited and happy. Along those same lines, make eye contact with all of the members of the group. So I've seen it before where, let's say you're in a meeting and you've got four people there. They'll make the pitch and look just at the most senior person, he or she, almost the entire time. And I think it's a huge mistake because a lot of times you've got the most senior person in the room who's going to defer that decision to whoever the subject matter expert is on their team or the person they trust most on their team. Because that senior level person may not necessarily know enough on the details of the particular subject or topic that you're talking about to be comfortable making that decision without that input from their most knowledgeable team member. And if you just give them the cold shoulder and you only look at Steve or Betty, whoever the most senior person is, that you could rub them the wrong way. Like, hey, didn't matter that I was in the room. Who am I? I'm just the person that's going to make the decision, and you didn't even look at me. So you want to kind of scan the room, make eye contact with people. Don't be a stalker and stare at them for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, but make eye contact. Acknowledge that they're important. Acknowledge that you're trying to include them in your presentation, and acknowledge that they're important, or they wouldn't be in the room. So, and then just be open and honest. Don't lie. Don't make stuff up. Don't be underhanded. Just be upfront. If there's problems, tell them there's problems. And that takes us to our next point, which is proactively address any concerns. Eminem was in a movie called 8 Mile, and so he does a rap battle, and in the final rap battle that he's with, he lists all of the things out that the other guy would have said about him. Yes, I'm white trash. Yes, I live in a trailer with my mom. Yes, my girlfriend had sex with another guy. Yes, my idiot friend shot himself in the foot. All of those things, he goes out and addresses them before they become issues. And the other guy doesn't have anything to say in the rap battle. And so Eminem wins the rap battle. I get it's a movie. I get it's scripted. I get it was designed to work out that way. But it's a good teachable moment. And it's a good learning moment in that movie. You generally know what the objections are going to be. And if you're trying to persuade, you need to have solutions and or responses to those objections. So at one point, I was working for a company that was talking about upgrading their IT systems. And I tried to get, so IT system is a big spend, right? It was millions and millions of dollars. I think the quote came in around $13 million. And we did not move forward with it. But when I was putting that pitch together to sell it internally to the owner of the company, I tried to get as much savings data as I could. So if we upgrade to this system, our rotation in the warehouse will get better, and we will have this big of a reduction in expired product, this big of a reduction in overstocked inventory. So it'll increase our cash flow by X per week. It'll have this much more efficiency in figuring out how to forward buy on price increases, and we'll be able to optimize the profit on those price increases. So knowing that the overall price tag was going to be an objection, I tried to get as much information as I could on savings that would be generated to offset that spend and operational efficiencies that would be driven by that spend. And look, some things are tough. Like, when I went and said, hey, we got to spend 13 million bucks, or I'm recommending that we spend 13 million bucks, like, I get it. That's a lot of money. I was when I was at a company in New Hampshire, a very large privately held company. We didn't have a headquarters, so we were all kind of scattered around these various buildings and warehouses that had been converted to office space. And was it awkward? Sure, but was it the end of the world? No. And it's in a little town in New Hampshire. It's a multi-billion-dollar company, and the owner kept making plans and then scrapping plans to build a corporate headquarters. And he wanted the money spent on the business. Makes perfect sense. Why would you not want to reinvest the money back in the business itself? Having a shiny new headquarters doesn't really drive any more sales in that business. So why spend it? And so, like, I tried to explain to people because they were upset. I get a new office with glass windows or glass walls and windows that overlook the mountains, all that stuff. Yeah, that's great. But like the minute you build that building in a small town in New Hampshire, you own it forever. Who's going to buy it from you? What other multi-billion-dollar company is going to come in and buy that building from you in the inevitable event that you need to or want to sell it somewhere down the road. So you got to get ahead of all of those. You got to think about what the objections are going to be, get ahead of those, have responses, have solutions, have comments so that you show you've thought about this problem from a 360-degree perspective and you have solutions or potential solutions in place for what some of these real objections or real problems are could be. Be persistent, but don't hard sell. Like we talked about, nobody wants the window salesman that camps in their house and won't leave until you buy windows from them. If you time it right, and sometimes just because you want to sell something to someone doesn't mean they want to buy it. They might want to buy it, and they might not be able to buy it. They might be in a budget freeze for 6 months. They might be restaffing and reorganizing the business, and there's a kind of a freeze put on any non-necessary spending, any incremental spending. You could have the best product in the world, and if you go into that environment, you're probably going to be unsuccessful. Not through any fault of your own, just bad timing. And then tone. Like we had a guy, that he was so good at running warehouses, but he was so bad at dealing with people. We used to joke and say we could give him $1,000 to give away to someone, and he'd screw it up. He'd find a way to make that negative for whoever got that $1,000. So your tone and your approach are terribly important. I jokingly say a lot when you go home, and I'll say it from my perspective. So I've been married to my wife for a long time. If I go home, I've got a bottle of wine and some nice flowers, and I bring her home her favorite dessert, and we watch a movie and snuggle on the couch. That's essentially the same. I'm approaching trying to get the same outcome as coming home and saying, hey, how about it? But one approach has a much higher likelihood of success than the other. One approach is much more palatable than the other. Got to think about that when you're making your pitch and how you're going about it. So don't hard sell people. That doesn't mean you just acquiesce, or someone says no, you don't go Tommy Boy and go, great, thanks, do you validate? Like, don't go running out of the room just because they say no once. You can keep pushing, but you want to be respectful when you do it. You want to be professional when you do it. Along those lines, don't badmouth your competition. It's so bad. You're like a teenager that's badmouthing their ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. It just is juvenile. It's unprofessional. It shows that you don't have confidence in yourself. Shows that you don't have confidence in your product. Don't badmouth your competition. Now, if you have a clear advantage over your competition, nothing wrong with that. Like we run some grocery stores in Chicago, and we cut meat in our grocery stores. Our closest competitor, our competitor that's most like us, has good meat, but it's case ready, meaning there's no one in the store with a knife that's cutting meat. They're ordering it already prepackaged, and you have to buy it prepackaged. I think that's a big advantage for us. But our competitor runs great grocery stores. They run great grocery stores. They just have gone a different route on their meat department, and we feel like it gives us a competitive advantage. We're not afraid to call out that competitive advantage, but we don't say they suck because they don't cut meat, because they don't suck. They run really good grocery stores. They just don't happen to cut meat there. And then you got to consistently try to demonstrate value. Like, what's in it for the person that you're trying to persuade? Why is it worth their time, effort to do what you're asking them to do? What value do you bring to them? Don't focus on what you need or what you want. Focus on solving their problem. Focus on solving their issue. You're a much more likely chance of success than if you take the other approach. And then ask for their feedback. Ask them, what do you think? Even midway, there's nothing wrong with stopping a quarter way, halfway through your presentation going, hey, I just want to do a level set right now. How are you feeling about stuff? Are there questions that you have? If they bring up questions that you've got coming later in the deck, say, that's a great question. We're going to address it a little bit later. That's okay. That's okay. But you want interaction. You want them to be engaged in what you're doing. And the best way to do that is to ask them questions and truly listen to what they have to say. Don't be defensive. Don't explain it away. Don't say, it's a stupid question, or I'll answer that later. Truly listen and say, hey, thanks for asking that. That's great. We've got some points on that coming up, so it's okay. I'd rather address it a few slides into the deck. That's one way to do it. And then address concerns when you're able to. And then the last one that I tell people all the time, perfectly acceptable in most instances. I don't know, but I can find out and get back to you. It's okay to say that. It shouldn't be on something so basic that someone's going to look and go, really? You came in unprepared with this piece of data? If you look at the Secret Service director who recently resigned, when she went to the joint houses of, or sorry, I guess it was the Senate hearings. Um, she was grossly unprepared for those hearings. She had basic questions that she couldn't answer, didn't have information for, and then she just looked incompetent. She looked like she didn't care or was hiding something, neither of which are good. And so she tendered her resignation under a lot of pressure and duress. But in most circumstances, I don't know, and I'll get back to you, is okay. Then actually follow up, get the information you need, and get back to the person that you promised you would get back to. Terribly important to do that. So, um, yeah, look, those are real world tips. Those are real world things that you can use when you're trying to persuade. Now, that persuasion can be in your personal life, it can be in your professional life, it can be on your behalf, it can be on someone you know and care about's behalf. And you've got to kind of read the situation and understand what you're trying to accomplish, and then put together the best plan possible to accomplish that, knowing the audience, the circumstances, the timing, and all the variables you have to consider for whatever it is you're trying to pitch. So speak clearly and directly, use facts and experience to prove your point, match your audience's cadence and body language, proactively address concerns, be persistent and don't be a slimy, hard salesperson, and then ask for their feedback and truly listen to and accept their feedback. Those are all tips that you can use when you're trying to persuade someone or the next time you're making a pitch. So thanks again, guys, for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Don't forget to go to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All of our content is on there. All of our podcast episodes are on there. You can sign up for our newsletter on there. And we really appreciate the support. Glad you came back, and we're looking forward to see you next time. Everybody have a great week.